I think we're live. Naomi, this is our first Facebook Live.
Hey, hi Facebook people. We are totally unprepared, right? We don't have one of those sticks. We don't really understand Facebook. But
We're uniquely trained to screw this up.
we are. But we decided we are in Vancouver because we just did a big event last night for the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. And I'm doing a speech at UBC today. And
Naomi, you already have people saying that they love you in the sidebar.
Hi.
That's Pascal.
Well, okay, we wanted to, the real reason we thought we had to do this is because Vancouver is like the most beautiful place in the entire world right now. The cherry blossoms are in bloom. I feel we should get remarried just because. Like, look around. It's insane.
Do you want to introduce me then?
Oh, sorry. I'm here with my husband, Avi Lewis. And we are basically on a wedding photography set in Vancouver in the spring with the cherry blossoms all around. We're on Granville Island, the marina, the
Let's hang on.
sparkle.
If I look away, we won't hear you.
Okay. And we're here to talk about how corporate money is destroying the world.
In the most beautiful setting imaginable.
And by the way, the cherry blossoms really shouldn't be in bloom yet. Because it's been a crazy warm year.
Right. I mean, I think everything in Vancouver is 4 weeks early.
Yeah.
That's a climate change conversation for another live broadcast. But it's related.
It is
so
related.
You just wrote this piece in The Nation that is blown up online about what your problem is with Hillary.
Yeah.
And for people who haven't had a chance to read it yet, just give us the basic rant.
Yeah, so please read it. It's up on The Nation. And I think the headline is, "The problem with Hillary is not just her corporate cash, it's her corporate worldview." And it's responding to this controversy that really kind of took off last week when this young Greenpeace campaigner asked Hillary Clinton she was actually very polite. She said, "Thank you for speaking out on climate change. Will you agree not to take money from fossil fuels in the future?" Fossil fuel money was her phrase, and Hillary Clinton just got very angry. Said she was so sick of the Sanders campaign lying, and this was offensive for a couple of reasons. This was not coming from the Sanders campaign; it was coming from an independent climate activist. They've been showing up at many of Hillary's events and asking these questions. They've been asking them of all the candidates, asking candidates to divest from fossil fuels. And one of the things that's interesting to me is that many of the young people who have been doing this activism started in the fossil fuel divestment movement at their universities, and they kind of became activists asking their universities to divest from fossil fuels. And now they are taking that to its logical conclusion. They're asking their politicians to divest from fossil fuels, saying, you can't, on the one hand, claim to be fighting for our future at the same time as you take money from companies that have so much carbon in their proven reserves that it is annihilating our future. So Hillary got very angry about this. She lost her cool, and then a lot of her supporters. Sorry, there are dogs barking in the background.
Do you want me to go talk to those folks?
I don't think they're going to listen to reason. There's 3 of them.
I wasn't thinking of talking to the dogs. I was thinking of talking to the owners.
I don't think the owners are going to be able to do anything about it either. This is live, guys. This is live. There are cherry blossoms, there are dogs barking, and it's all good, I hope.
Those are the running dogs of the fossil fuel industry.
Right. Yes. So all of these, sort of this symphony of voices came forward to say, it's nothing, it's no big deal, don't worry about it, nothing to see here, move along. Sure, she takes money from lobbyists, registered fossil fuel lobbyists, but it's only, $4.5 billion, and plus those lobbyists work for lots of other industries. So who knows, whether they're trying to influence on behalf of the fossil fuel companies. Maybe it's big pharma, maybe it's big agri. The defense was completely bizarre.
Don't forget all those people who said there's no way to trace any connection between donations from industries and a candidate's policies and views. Because why would they spend hundreds of millions of dollars to influence policy? It makes no sense. It makes no sense that they would donate in order to get something back for it. That's crazy talk.
Just because they're lobbyists, and that's exactly what they exist to do.
Exactly.
The whole thing, there's been this strange kind of sudden naivete, like, well, that's not the way the world works. And people know that it is. And the other thing is, like, the argument was, okay, well, Bernie Sanders has said she takes significant amounts of money. Well, if you compare it to the huge pot of money that she has, this, $4.5 billion isn't that much. So, to me, looking at this, it's like, okay, that doesn't prove that this is insignificant. It just proves that the way U.S. elections are funded is completely insane. And this is a lot of money by any measure. But the other thing is that it doesn't account for all the money. There are funders and supporters of the Clinton campaign who are not seen as part of the fossil fuel sector because they are, say, financiers with multiple investments, or somebody like Warren Buffett, whose Berkshire Hathaway has all kinds of holdings, insurance and transportation and so on. I mean, it's all these mixed assets, but he's up to his eyeballs in coal. Warren Buffett he owns a railway that transports coal as one of its I think coal is the biggest factor in its transportation, but he also owns some of the dirtiest coal-fired utilities in the country, and we've seen this very ugly battle playing out in Nevada, where his coal-fired utility is taking on the solar industry because they don't want rooftop solar to create a situation where former customers of the utility become competitors of the utility.
So let's get into a couple of things. One, right. Some people are in the comments are questioning why you would endorse a political candidate, since no change ever really comes at the ballot box.
Right.
And other people want the camera guy to shh. So maybe you want to just address a procedural question about the concept of our broadcast.
Oh, okay. We are going to be doing these, and he's not a camera guy. Avi and I are going to be.
I think that's clear from my camera work, by the way.
We are going to be doing these together, and sometimes I'm going to be interviewing Avi, and sometimes we're going to be talking about it together. Avi is the director of This Changes Everything, the film that I hope many of you have seen. He also made the film The Take, which we made together, and in Canada was on the CBC hosting television shows for many years, and also hosted and produced shows on Al Jazeera English. So many of you may know Avi's work, even if you don't know his name, and we're going to be doing this together, so stop telling him to shh.
No, they can still tell me to shoot. They just need to know what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yes, this is what we're going to be
doing.
Which
is asking you questions.
Asking me questions, and sometimes I'll be asking you questions.
Right, and sometimes answering them. But, why are you endorsing Bernie Sanders?
Okay.
First of all, are you even American? My question is, what is this famous Canadian author doing weighing in on this?
Okay. So, first of all, here's a secret. I actually am American. I have dual citizenship. My parents are American.
Oh, like Ted Cruz.
I am as American as Ted Cruz. No, I was born in Canada, but both my parents are American citizens. And when you have American parents, you automatically become an American citizen. I'm born in Canada, so
used to be that way.
Well,
I don't think the rules are quite so loose anymore.
But it was when I was born. So I have dual citizenship, and I can vote in American elections. I don't vote in American elections because I've never lived in the U.S. and I identify as Canadian. I feel myself to be Canadian, but all my extended family is in the United States. And in this election, I am going to vote, and I am going to vote for Bernie Sanders. And I've never endorsed a candidate in a U.S. presidential election before. And
so why now? Why to come out?
Well, to be honest, it is, it comes out of the work that we both have been doing on climate change over the past 7 years, and just being completely immersed in climate science and knowing that whoever the next president is comes to power with their backs completely up against the wall. And every study that comes out tells us that what happens in the next 4 years, the term of the next president, is it's going to determine the fate of the entire planet. I mean, this is the thing about this presidential election, is that as all U.S. presidential elections are never just of interest to the United States, because the U.S. has such a huge military power, such a huge economy. The decisions impact the entire world. When it comes to climate change, this is quite literal. The U.S. is the second largest polluter after China, because the U.S. has been polluting on such a massive scale for so much longer than China, whether or not the U.S. chooses to lead on climate change has a huge impact on whether other countries do as well, whether China does, whether India does, whether countries like Canada does. So it really matters whether or not a climate leader comes to power at this absolutely pivotal point. We are out of time. There's a study that just came out last week saying that by next year, every new power plant has to be carbon neutral.
Zero emissions.
Carbon. Yeah.
And that is to only have a 50% chance of reaching the targets agreed upon by all the governments in Paris.
Exactly. I mean, this is the thing about Paris. I mean, we were both there. It was the big climate summit in Paris. We set these targets of we have to keep warming below 2 degrees Celsius. Actually, we should try for 1.5 is what it says in the agreement. We have already warmed the planet by 1 degree. We're already seeing massive disruption. Everything is happening faster than expected. And yet the governments came to Paris with plans to cut emissions that would actually allow temperatures to increase by twice that amount. So, this can't just be about continuing what Obama has done. We need somebody who is going to move much more aggressively. And, I don't believe Bernie Sanders is perfect, but I do believe that his track record on climate change is really stellar. I mean, I was part of the movement against the Keystone XL pipeline. I was arrested outside the White House. Bernie Sanders was supporting us every step of the way. And look, we were up against Hillary Clinton because Clinton's State Department at that time had commissioned really flawed environmental assessments from corporations who had a long track record of working with the oil industry. And they produced these reports saying, oh, well, you can build the Keystone XL pipeline and it won't have a significant environmental impact. And this was just madness. And so, through years of organizing and activism, finally, wisdom prevailed, and the Keystone XL pipeline did not pass the climate test. And Barack Obama said that we can't do this because of climate change. But I think that taught me a lot about who Bernie Sanders is and who Hillary Clinton is. And the argument I make in the piece is that it is not just about the donations from the Warren Buffetts and from the fossil fuel lobbyists or the direct donations to the Clinton family, the Clinton Foundation, the Bill, Hillary, Chelsea Clinton Foundation. And they've received direct donations from Exxon, from Shell, from ConocoPhillips, from Chevron. It's not just about all of that. It's about the worldview that represents. Hillary Clinton is a dyed-in-the-wool neoliberal. If you look at the model of the Clinton Foundation, it is all about how we are not going to get real action by taking on corporations. We need to cajole them through this sort of noblesse oblige, and we need partnerships.
Win-win-win.
Win-win-win. And the Clintons really have pioneered this, right, along with Bill Gates. But they were first out of the gates in doing this, and they have raised huge amounts of money. They've done a lot of corporate cleansing of reputations in the process. And the problem with climate change is this is just a disaster, because climate change is not win-win for the fossil fuel companies. In order for us to win, they have to lose.
Well, a lot of people have trouble with that. A lot of people think that you need to get big corporations on side. They have a lot of money and they have a lot of power. So answer that question in people's minds. Well, lots of people already believe it's a battle. But for those who don't, who think that this partnership model is somehow kind of more civilized.
Well, I would say that we tried it. We gave it our best shot, and this is the logic that prevailed. When the Clinton government, Bill Clinton's government, went to Kyoto to negotiate the Kyoto Protocol, which the U.S. didn't end up signing, the Clinton administration absolutely insisted, against objections from Europe, against objections from almost every other government, that there had to be a mechanism in the Kyoto Protocol that it would allow for carbon markets, which is the ultimate win-win. So rather than telling corporations, no, you just can't dig up all that carbon or you're going to face penalties, it was, let's set up a carbon market which will allow fossil fuel companies to trade in carbon credits, and they will find a way to profit from climate change. The same people who profited from the extraction of fossil fuels will profit from this carbon market. It turned out to be a magnet for fraud, because lo and behold, when it turns out that you're able to trade in air, it attracts all kinds of fraudsters. and it hasn't significantly lowered emissions. So I believe we've tried the win-win logic, the corporate win-win logic when it comes to climate change for a couple of decades now. The track record is abysmal, and now we actually have to do the hard work of saying no to fossil fuel companies and saying yes in a very big way to renewables, and recognizing that yes, there are huge wins in this. There are huge numbers of well-paying jobs that can be created. There is economic and racial justice that can be delivered and must be delivered in the process. We have to have a principle of frontline first, so that the frontline communities that have borne the toxic load of our addiction to fossil fuels, where the kids have such high asthma rates, where you have cancer clusters because the refineries are in their backyards, the mines are in their backyards. Those are the communities that need to be first in line to own and control their own renewable energy projects, to get the jobs, to get the profits, to pay for services in their communities. So this can be win-win for the people, but it can't be win-win for the corporations. And that's why the Clinton entanglements with the corporate world and this logic of, no, we can't take them on, we have to partner with them, is so incredibly toxic at this climate countdown moment. And that's why I decided to endorse Bernie Sanders and sort of break my own rule about U.S. politics, come out as a dual citizen, as an American, because you know what? We all, in a just world, we'd all have a vote in this election, everybody on this planet. But as somebody lucky enough to have dual citizenship and have the ability to vote in this election, man, I'm using it.
So the comment stream is becoming more and more about which cabinet position you should hold in a Bernie Sanders government. But there's a number of people that are talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership and asking what the connection there is. You talk in your article about how the Clinton Global Initiative model is sort of premised on the idea that there's so much wealth sloshing around the world, much of it unleashed by the deregulation policies of the late 90s under Bill Clinton, that accessing billionaires' consciences is really the way to solve the epic problems of the world. And free trade is really a product of the Clinton era. NAFTA, the first free trade agreement with Canada and the United States in 1988, and onwards to the Trans-Pacific Partnership today, which is sort of amazingly becoming an election issue. What are your thoughts on the role of trade, not just in the climate fight, but how it's emerged in a surprising way in the U.S. election?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when Bill Clinton was running in 1992, NAFTA was a huge issue. There was massive opposition from the environmental movement, which was worried about the impact it would have on environmental protections, and of course from the labor movement, which was worried about how this was going to lead to layoffs and pushing down labor standards in the United States. And Bill Clinton campaigned promising to renegotiate NAFTA to make sure that workers and the environment were protected. And what ended up happening is, rather than reopening the main text, the binding text of NAFTA, what was negotiated were these two add-ons, which are non-binding. So there's an environmental addendum to NAFTA and a labor addendum to NAFTA, which, as was warned at the time, are completely toothless, are totally inadequate. And when Bill Clinton signed NAFTA, he said that this was not just about this trade deal, but really about remaking the world, that we were opening up a new era. And what he knew at the time was that we were on the verge of creating the World Trade Organization. And the U.S. was, under Clinton, was the major force behind the creation of the World Trade Organization. And so NAFTA was the prototype for all of these trade deals to come, including the Trans-Pacific Partnership. They allow multinational corporations to sue governments when they do the right things about climate change. And the best example of this is the Keystone XL pipeline right now. Finally, under huge pressure, Obama does the right thing and doesn't listen to those flawed environmental assessments coming from the State Department and says no to the Keystone XL pipeline. Then TransCanada turns around and says, well, we're going to use our ability to sue governments, and we're going to sue the U.S. government using NAFTA for lost profits, the profits that they claim they would have made had they been allowed to build the pipeline. So they're now, they've begun a process of suing the U.S. government for $15 billion. what the Trans-Pacific Partnership would do is allow many thousands more corporations to do exactly that around the world, because they would be covered by the Trans-Pacific Partnership under this NAFTA-style model. And the reason why this has become an issue is really the failure of the neoliberal project. The promise, in those heady days in the early 1990s was, well, if we unleash the power of economic growth, if we create the optimal conditions for corporations, then they will make a lot of money, and it will trickle down and benefit everybody else. That was the heady promise of free trade, of banking deregulation, of all of it, right? And the problem we have now is we have a track record, right? I mean, it's easy to promise this stuff before you've done it. I mean, you can say anything, but here we are now with decades of experience, decades of layoffs. The impact, one of the biggest impacts of opening up the world for this model of American-style consumption is that it is intimately tied to the spike in greenhouse gas emissions. So we have the track record, and people aren't buying it, and they're angry. They are angry because they've been discarded from this model, and Trump is attracting a lot of that anger, and he's saying, well, let's blame the most vulnerable people in society. Let's blame immigrants. Let's blame refugees. Let's blame, let's blame Muslims. Let's build a wall. All of that. And I think what's exciting about Bernie Sanders is he's saying you have a right to be angry. This is a flawed system. Trickle-down economics has failed. The money is sticking up at the top, but let's actually talk about the systems that are failing. Let's talk about the trade deals. Let's not just, let's talk about the bankers, and let's talk about the people who introduced these rules. So rather than pushing that anger down, he's pushing the anger up, and not in I think a dangerous way, but in a really, really hopeful way. What worries me most about Hillary is that this is an angry election. This is an angry moment, and I don't believe that she has anything to say to that anger, right? And that's why I actually think Bernie Sanders is a better candidate in a general election in this moment in history than Hillary Clinton is, and that's why I think we're seeing this wave of victories, 4 states in a row with really big margins, because he is speaking to that.
All right, so you have got a speech to make.
I do.
Here in Vancouver.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to Edmonton for the NDP convention.
Yes.
A little footnote for the Canadian folks watching.
Yep.
And we should probably wrap it up here. We're going to do another one in a few days.
Yes, you are going to the NDP convention, not as a somebody who's been really involved in electoral politics, but to talk about this project that we've been involved in called the LEAP Manifesto.
The LEAP Manifesto. We should leave some mystery so people come back next time.
Okay, so next, can I just turn the camera around? Can I try this?
Maybe I'll shave before we do the next one.
But there's such
you look
pretty
so
flowers
great with
behind you.
No, I'm kind of side lit. Well,
right.
let's preserve the mystery. Who is that guy?
Who is that shaky camera? Who's that terrible cameraman? Well, next week, or next time we do one of these things, you are going to tell us whether or not a major political party in Canada decided to adopt this very radical document that came up from the grassroots about how we can solve the climate crisis and the inequality crisis at the same time.
So you know what? Actually, there's a lot more people coming online now. We're like
really?
at 9,000 and headed for
9,000
for 10.
Oh,
yeah.
Thanks for not telling me that earlier. I would be super nervous.
And people are really, really engaged in the comments, of course.
Do they like it? Do you guys like this?
There's
this is
a lot.
First thing.
There's a
Are they
lot
mad?
Of,
is there a lot of
nobody
anger?
The angry people are usually angry. But basically, no. People love this kind of truth telling. And I think it's really refreshing for people to be able to share information.
Please read the
directly.
article. I'm a better writer than I am a talker, especially when I don't have notes. I feel like I didn't make some of the really key points.
This is not what people are saying in the comments.
Go to the Nation.
But listen,
read it.
as an antidote to
it's
these
not long.
a lot of people are talking about the limitations of electoral politics.
Okay.
And the LEAP Manifesto is something that came from social movements from outside of electoral politics, and now is trying to find a way to influence electoral politics so we can get some of these policies that we desperately need to get off fossil fuels and deal with the inequality crisis at the same time actually passed and become laws in our country.
Yeah.
So give a very quick preview of the LEAP Manifesto for folks around the world who haven't yet heard about it.
Right. So once again, you can read it, leapmanifesto.org. Sorry, it's so retro reading. But so
say it slower. Leapmanifesto.org.
Yeah. there are now LEAP projects that are happening in Australia, that are happening in the Arctic, that are happening in Scandinavia, in the Bronx. People are coming together to write their own manifestos, and it's really about cross-sectoral organizing. It's about getting out of our issue silos, coming together and saying, okay, what is the world we actually want? We spend so much time saying no to what we don't want.
Hey, thanks, Tyler, for posting the URL. Go on.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and you know, we don't want these terrible trade deals, and we don't want mass incarceration and police violence, and sexism and racism, and corporate influence over politics. But what does the world we want look like? And we're part of this wonderful process where for 2 days, 60 movement organizers, leaders from Indigenous rights, labor rights, climate, food justice came together and created space for ourselves to dream about what that world would look like. It begins with the principle that we need to shift from a culture of endless taking from the earth and from bodies, from the social safety net, from communities, and move to a culture of caretaking, of caring for the planet and caring for one another. And that begins by respecting the original caretakers of the land, Indigenous people, fully implementing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. It begins by respecting the science and saying we do have to get off fossil fuels very quickly. And the exciting thing is we can. We have research out of Stanford University showing how we can get to 100% renewables by mid-century for not just electricity, but transportation as well. We can create huge numbers of jobs, but we have to make sure that we do it with justice. So that means that frontline communities have to be first in line to own and control their own renewable energy. We need to completely reimagine how we grow our food, so that soil once again captures carbon, and we don't rely on fossil fuel inputs. And we need to completely redefine what a green job is, what a climate job is. It's not just putting up solar panels, that too, but it's also the low carbon work that is the work of caretaking and teaching and the arts. And many of these sectors are dominated by women. Many of them are dominated by immigrant women. Another key plank of the platform has to do with building alliances with the migrant rights movement, and recognizing that the reason so many people are being forced off of their land is because of wars our governments have supported, climate deals our governments have supported,
and those trade deals.
And now the impacts in the form of climate change. So we need to give full rights to all workers, regardless of status. We need to open our borders to far more immigrants and refugees.
You know what they say, good enough to work, good enough to stay.
Yeah, and you know what's been amazing has been being part of this process of really building not just like a coalition, which is just like a list, but a new story about how all of our struggles are interconnected. So you know, I don't believe that Bernie Sanders is the Messiah. You know, I don't believe that governments are going to do this for us, but I do believe it matters whether there are governments that are open to listening. And honestly, one of the things that's really pissed me off over the last couple of weeks is watching Hillary Clinton treat these incredible young women, whether they're with Black Lives Matter or whether they are part of the fossil fuel divestment movement, with a lot of disrespect. I don't like to see that. These women are incredible. These are the leaders, not just of tomorrow, of today. I'm getting emotional.
So we're going to be doing this a fair amount in the next few months. We've decided to dive in and share things live and pass the phone back and forth.
Yeah, and you're going to shave next time.
I'm going to shave next time, and and we're going to say goodbye for now. Hey, listen, we're up to 11,500 people watching.
Wow.
Really lovely comments. In future,
don't give up on reading, people.
I don't know, says the writer. This is not a shortcut to reading the reading the work. It's just
okay.
It's a nice addendum. Right. But you know, we'll solicit more questions next time, and maybe we'll have a stand to be a little less shaky, and maybe we can really have a much more interactive session next time.
Thank you, Avi.
Thanks, Naomi. This was totally fun. I'm going to hit finish now.
Bye.
Say bye.